Hello, welcome to Revive and Rise. I'm your host, Melody Parrish. I want to thank you so much for joining us today. And for the month of June, we've been talking about strength and resilience and how we can build these characteristics into our lives. And so today, I want to talk about relationships, social interactions. And when I'm talking about relationships, I'm talking about romantic relationships, friendships, any kind of interaction that you can have with another human being. It's so important. And we don't think about that all of the time, but we need each other. And to succeed in life, to experience life, we need each other. And when you look at the statistics from the World Health Organization, 16% of the human population worldwide experiences loneliness. And of that 16%, 81% of that population is in the United States. Those statistics really shocked me, but I understand why. You know, in this country, we're always taught to be independent from a young age. We're taught to be independent. We're taught that we can do anything ourselves, that we can only trust ourselves, and that's just not true. I mean, we do need to be able to depend on ourselves and to trust ourselves and to be able to do things ourselves. We do need that. But we also need to understand that we need each other. We need other human beings. We can't exist on our own. We just can't. We're social creatures. And so when we talk about 81% of the loneliness in the world, in the worldwide percentage of loneliness, which is 16%. So 81% of the 16% of loneliness is felt in the United States, then we see that that's a problem. And if you look around at the world around you here, you can see that that's a problem. You have people that are just walking by other people, like not noticing them, not noticing that they even exist. You have people that only stick to their groups of people, so they don't ever talk to or interact with anyone else in the world. You have people that don't speak or interact with people that are different than they are somehow. So you have all these different types of isolation that occurs, or just maybe not isolation is the right word, but these different types of grouping people and not interacting with people. And when you look at loneliness and you start to really think about it and dig deep, there's so many multiple facets of loneliness. I was going through various research studies to prepare for this episode, and it's fascinating the different ways that they measure loneliness and social interactions, and the different ways that we can express this loneliness that we're feeling. You always hear that you can be in a room full of people and still feel lonely. I know I myself have experienced that many times, been surrounded by people, and yet in my heart, in my soul, I feel lonely. And that's something that's really hard for people to understand, because how do you feel lonely but yet you're surrounded by people? And it's hard to explain. But there are feelings of loneliness and feelings of emptiness. And that's one way to look at loneliness. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the facets of loneliness. I'm going to talk about the types of loneliness. I'm going to talk about the health effects that loneliness and isolation can have. And then I'm going to give my personal experiences, and I'm going to talk about the positive impacts of social interaction, the positive impacts of our friends, our family, our spouses, or people that we're in these romantic relationships with, our co-workers, people we meet in random times during the day, be it at the grocery store. We interact with people in the food service industry. So I'm going to talk about all those things. But first, I feel like we need to talk about the multiple facets of loneliness. And you can go through various research studies, and they'll talk about this in detail. I was looking at some of the research from the National Institute of Health, and it's fascinating how detailed it is. It's all fascinating to what parts and what perspectives they detail and describe loneliness. So I invite you to go to the NIH website and just look at all of the details and all the information that's there, because it's fascinating. But they say one of the facets of loneliness is the feelings of emptiness and abandonment. Their feelings, their emotions, so they're subjective. That's what we call subjective forms. And it's how we feel. We may feel empty inside. You hear things like that. You hear things like you've been abandoned or things like that. And those feelings can lead into our decision making. And we'll talk about how feelings of isolation and loneliness alter our emotional processing. But these feelings of emptiness and abandonment that we feel and that exist inside of us, they affect our decisions that we make. They affect the way we think and obtain information from the environment around us. And these feelings will also create a dangerous mental spiral that we feel empty, we feel abandoned, we feel lonely, we feel isolated, and we can, if our minds don't get interrupted in that kind of thinking, we can take ourselves down a deep, dark hole that it's really hard to get out of without someone else, without someone else's perspective or ideas or support. So it's very important for us to be aware of these feelings. Just be aware of them. Just acknowledge them when we do feel these feelings. And then we need to ask ourselves, why am I feeling this way? What has led me to feel this way, to perceive things this way? What is happening? And the next facet of loneliness will be temporal. And that loneliness can be over time. Again, it's something that we as individuals perceive. So we perceive our own loneliness, and we'll go around in our lives and we'll see that there aren't people around. Physically, we don't see people around us. Physically, we don't see those social interactions, and we don't feel them either. And over time, that can cause us to feel lonely, because that can cause us to just feel like we don't have people in our lives. And that can affect our mental state to where, well, our eyes don't see people around us. Our eyes don't see people that are coming when we need them. Our eyes don't see that. So therefore, we are lonely, and we're all alone in this world. There's nobody that I can count on. There's nobody in my life. Sorry. Excuse me. And so that gets to be kind of driven in us. And that affects our ideas, that affects our decisions. Again, that affects the way we think and the way we perceive the world around us. We feel lonely. More of the emotional aspects that come with loneliness or sadness, we can feel melancholy and just blah. We can feel frustration, shame, desperation, all of these things. And from these things come more emotional things and more emotional reactions. That there comes more changes in our mental status and our decision making and our thinking. It can have a long lasting effect as well. And so when we talk about loneliness, we're talking about 4 different types. And so when we talk about these types, you can divide them up into objective, which we can observe, we can see, we can measure. It's something tangible. Also, there are subjective types of loneliness. It's the way we see things. They're self-viewed. It's feelings. It's emotions. And those can't physically be measured. So when we talk about aloneness and feeling and having aloneness, that's like I was talking about before, not having people around. There's no one around. You do not see people physically around you. And I'm not talking about having a handful of people or having one person that you can count on, because that is not the aloneness that I'm talking about. There are those few people in everyone's life that you can depend on, that you can count on, that always are there, that are always there to listen, that are always there to help. And those people are so important. We don't realize how important they are, and they don't realize how important they are, but they're so important. I'm talking about people that are alone. There's no one around them. There's no one that notices them, and there's no one that sees them as human beings. When I'm talking about this kind of aloneness, it reminds me of my friends without roof. And my friends without a roof have really talked to me and shown me one way, many ways that I can interact with others. They have spoken to me about being seen in the world, about people actually acknowledging their existence, about people actually acknowledging that they are human beings. That's the kind of aloneness I'm talking about. I've talked to people that suffer from mental illness and that they're talking about being alone. There's many people with severe mental illness that are shunned from society, that are not acknowledged as being a human being. A lot of these people, both people with severe mental illness and people who are friends without a roof, they're both seen as problems. They're both seen as something that negative. And that's the aloneness that I'm talking about, the way that those people are avoided. That's the aloneness, having no one around you and feeling isolated. Social isolation is so damaging. And that's when social isolation is when you're physically separated. Again, you have no one around you. You have no one who wants to be around you. For some reason, you have been picked out, you have been chosen or decided to be isolated. And this can be seen physically, even with like the child that sits alone and eats lunch, or the child that doesn't have friends at school, is not very social. The child at school that's bullied. Those are terrible interactions, because sometimes the only social interaction they have is the bullying. And that can be so detrimental for a person's mental health. So this social isolation, which we all found during the pandemic, is so devastating. You know, when we were on lockdown, when the world was on lockdown, when people could not visit and not be social, it was so detrimental to their mental health. The isolation. I'm not sure about the percentage, but I know there was definitely a rise in suicide rates, in depression, in anxiety. It just skyrocketed. And now we're going to talk about subjective types of loneliness. And when we talk about the subjective types of loneliness, we think of solitude. Solitude is a voluntary aloneness. I do this a lot. It's when you pull yourself away from social interactions. It's a time when you can recharge. It's a time when you can reflect. You can just pause in your social reactions and relationships, and when you can just take a moment to breathe. So not all types of loneliness are considered negative. Solitude is considered very beneficial, to just take a break from all of the social interactions in the world that you may have. It's a form of recharging, and I feel like it's so important to have solitude, at least moments of solitude. And I do that frequently to recharge and to also grow. I think that self-growth and personal growth comes from solitude and comes from just subjectively looking at your life and your actions and your decisions and what's going on. So I feel like solitude is a positive form of loneliness. if you take those times of solitude into extremes, that's when you have social isolation. And social isolation can also come from diseases or illnesses that you may have. I've known people with agoraphobia, which is a fear of crowds, and they socially isolate to the point where they stay in their homes or they stay where they feel safe. They don't venture out into social situations. They don't venture out into the public eye, and that can be a dangerous form of loneliness as well. But when we talk about solitude, it's voluntary. And if you use solitude properly and you know when to step back and you know when to give yourself that moment of peace, that moment to be alone with yourself, if you do that properly, it's a very good positive form of loneliness. Maybe we shouldn't call it loneliness, maybe aloneness. But it's a very positive, fulfilling type of aloneness. And your body will tell you, and your mind will tell you when you need to experience a little bit of solitude. But when we talk about loneliness, we're talking about another form of subjective loneliness would be when we have deficits in relationships. So when we're surrounded with people and we still feel alone, those are times when those relationships may just be surface relationships, which are good relationships to have. It's good ways to get along with people, to take that moment and have those surface relationships that you don't have to go deep into, but you can just, chat or talk about various things on the surface, but not tie your emotions to it. It's ways that you can interact with people and you don't feel like you have to dive deep within yourself to share. And a lot of times, if you're surrounded by only surface relationships, then you often feel misunderstood. You often feel like no one understands the real you. No one understands what you're thinking, or no one understands why you do the things you do, or why you make the decisions you make. Why do you act the way you do? People don't understand that when you're surrounded by those surface relationships. That's why earlier I was talking about those deep relationships, those few people that are in life that you can really be yourself around. You can really talk to those people and dive deep with those people. And that's why it's so important. And that's one way of looking at being in a room surrounded with people and yet feeling so lonely because you don't have those deep relationships in your life. And you can feel lonely and feel misunderstood and feel unseen and feel unrecognized when you're that way and when the relationships in your life. And that can be friendships, that can be co-workers, that can even be your romantic relationships. So many times I hear things like, I don't know who I'm married to anymore. I don't know who I'm dating anymore. Things have changed. I don't know who that person is. And that can come with personal growth, and that can come in very positive ways when we make positive changes to ourselves. But that can also come from not knowing and not going deep inside those relationships that exist in our lives. And so those are all types of loneliness that we can experience, and types of things that we may see or feel. They're objective and subjective. It's a way of measuring our loneliness. And when we're talking about the research, that's what they mean. That's how they measure. And the different forms of loneliness, and the statistics are based on these types of loneliness. And I invite you to look at many different research papers and research studies, because it's so important for us to understand what loneliness means, so that we can recognize it, so that we can then understand why we're making the decisions we are, why we are feeling the way we're feeling. And if any of those are negative, when we recognize it, we can stop it. So, statistic-wise, loneliness can have many impacts on our physical and mental health. Generally speaking, loneliness can affect our well-being 20 to 30%. 26% of those that feel loneliness have early mortality rates. They experience depression and anxiety at astonishing rates. The statistics are wide-ranged, and they go from 25% to 80% of people feeling lonely that experience depression and anxiety at alarming rates. It can not only affect our mental health, but it can also affect our physical health. I saw many studies that said that loneliness, if someone experiences loneliness, it can affect their health, their physical health, to where they have cardiovascular disease at the extent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. That was astonishing to me, but there were multiple studies that proved that. When you're feeling loneliness, when you're experiencing loneliness, you have higher blood pressure, and you have accelerated physiological aging processes. That's why when you see people that have experienced loneliness, maybe their hair is grayer, maybe they have more wrinkles on their face, maybe there's so many different things that physiologically the aging can be seen. The aging cannot be seen on the inside of our bodies. There's so many physically healthy ideas and physically healthy things about our bodies that hold on to that feeling of loneliness. You have feelings of isolation and loneliness that actually alter our emotional processing in our minds. And this being that it heightens our threat detection and our defensive social behaviors. So that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about how it affects our mental health and our mental statuses, and it affects our decisions. When we feel threatened we make different decisions. We go into that survival mode, and we make different decisions. We have different social behaviors that are defensive. And sometimes these decisions and behaviors can be triggered by the feelings of isolation and loneliness. You'll see people that will just self-isolate because they're feeling lonely. And it's hard to describe that, and it's hard for us to understand that, because you feel lonely, you just push people away. But that ties in with the emptiness and the abandonment. And rather than have someone hurt you and abandon you and leave, you just go ahead and push them away so that you feel like you're in control. It's like, push them away before they push me away. And it gives us a sense of control. That's one of those defensive social behaviors. And that comes from the feeling of abandonment. That's one of our an example of our decision making that may be affected or altered. And when we're experiencing these feelings of loneliness, it leads to attacks in our mind, either attacks on ourselves or attacks on the people that we're feeling the emptiness from, the abandonment from, the loneliness from. Think about it. When you're wanting someone or something from someone, when you're thinking about and you're wanting a reaction, a positive reaction from a person, and they don't exactly give you that positive reaction, then the feeling of emptiness that we did not receive that positive reaction causes us to turn into survival mode, to turn into defense mode. And so many decisions are made from that feeling of emptiness that just occurred. So when we think about our emotional processing that's altered, it can send us again into this spiral of the feelings of emptiness, and that turns into abandonment. That person doesn't like me, and I can see that because of this. And that causes us to make decisions, and a lot of times that's poor decisions. A lot of times those are poor decisions that can affect us in such a negative way. So when we're talking about all of these things and how it physically affects us and how it mentally affects us, how it can be detrimental to our physical health, it's really eye-opening to the fact that we need each other. We need each other emotionally. We need each other mentally and physically. When you think of when you have a problem that arises, a struggle or something that you need, but you don't have anyone to call. You don't have anyone to call to fulfill that need. You don't have anyone that you feel comfortable asking. Then fear sets in. Then the unknown sets in. And those things can be detrimental to us as well, because that increases our stress, that increases the cortisol that will be in our bodies, and that can have such negative effects on us physically. Again, heightened blood pressure, the release of stress hormones, and everything in your body will eventually shut down if you don't manage your stress a little better. So when I talk about the loneliness, again, I am not talking about being an introvert. If you are an introvert, that's something totally different. And that's not negative. You have people that are extroverts and people that are introverts. You have people that are extreme extroverts. You have people that are extreme introverts. But your body will tell you what you need. I like to joke around and say that I'm an introverted extrovert. But that's how I describe myself, because I'm a very social person. I love to talk to people. I love to interact with people. And I will tell people that, I will talk to a rock. I'll talk to anyone. And if there is no one around, I'll talk to myself. It's just, I thrive on that social interaction. But there are times when I need to take a break. There are times when I have just depleted all of the energy that I have for social interaction, and I just need to refill. And that's where it comes in to know that you need that solitude, to know that you need that time alone. And that's the way of using loneliness or aloneness in a positive way, in a voluntary way. So being an introvert is not a negative thing, and I want to make sure that I address that. When it's something totally different than the loneliness I'm talking about, which can be seen as negative. In my experiences, I've experienced both the solitude that I'm talking about and the loneliness that I'm speaking of. And I'm very happy that I've experienced both of those, because to me, you can't truly know the negative if you don't know the positive. Experiencing these things teaches us. You don't know what good things are until you have experienced the bad things. You don't know what positive is until you experience the negative. And I'm not saying that everything negative is something that everybody needs to experience and trying to change a negative in a positive. But what I am saying is that when we do experience these things, we learn. Because when you experience the negative, you learn what positive is, and you learn that you don't want the negative. You learn how to prevent the negative, or how to avoid it, or how to, when the negative happens, how to get out of it, how to handle it. And so when I'm talking about loneliness, there's various times in my life that I have experienced loneliness. When I was a child, I experienced loneliness, and I would just put myself into my room, and I could stay in my room, my bedroom, for hours and hours and hours. I would isolate myself, and I teetered on the positive isolation and the negative isolation when I was a child. And as I grew, anyone who knows my story knows about the times when I was in junior high school up through the first years of high school. And they know about my illness and the effect that loneliness had on me then was devastating. because I didn't have that social interaction. And that not having that social interaction left me so depleted. It wasn't until I started physical therapy and I interacted with my therapist. That's why I will always talk about the interactions that people that are experiencing sickness of some sort and their healthcare workers that provide service to them, that interaction is so important. I remember looking forward to going to my various therapies, physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, because I was able to interact with people. My therapist encouraged me. They saw me as a person. They saw me as a human being. They saw me as a person that wasn't broken. They saw me as someone that was not a problem. And just that feeling was, I can't even explain it. And so when you talk about loneliness and that feeling of isolation, I can understand that. And when I look at my mental state in those times, when I look at my feelings and emotions in those times, when I look at the decisions I made in those times, it's all very, very negative. And that part of my life was a very negative part. And then, when I grew up and when I started to grow into an adult that supports themselves, that relies on themselves, I turned into that person that felt like I had to do everything, that felt like I had to be the independent one, that felt like there was nobody in the world that I could count on but myself. And in a way, I would isolate people. And I didn't totally isolate people because I had a lot of those surface relationships. And that was because I didn't trust people. I didn't trust people, so I didn't want to go deep into my emotional person. I didn't want to go deep inside myself and start having these conversations and letting people in fully. And so for a while, I had so many surface relationships because I'm such an extrovert. And that's when I felt lonely in a room full of people. And then I was able, thankfully, to take, some of those surface relationships and go really, really deep within myself with these people. And, that was 20 years ago. And I'm still very close to these people. We may not talk every day, and, we may not see each other every day, but those are my people. And anytime we are able to meet, anytime we do talk, it's like no time has passed. And we understand each other and we see each other because we know each other. Those are the kind of people I'm talking about. Those people, I feel comfortable calling and asking for what I need. And I know they're busy, and I know they have so many things to do, but I know they'll help me. I know I can count on them. They may not be able to, they're in different states, so they may not be able to come rushing over, but I know they'll be there as much as they can. They'll be there to listen. They'll be there for that support. And those kind of things are invaluable. Those kind of people are invaluable. So I've also learned the meaning of loneliness, and I've experienced loneliness and isolation. And I understand it. But I've also experienced so much joy in the social connections that I have been able to make in life. And when I say that, I'm talking about social interactions with friends. I'm talking about social interactions with romantic relationships. I'm talking about social interactions with, people that I interact with on the street, that people that I interact with at the grocery store, that people I interact with in the service industry, people that are somehow helping me to get what I need, be it in a restaurant or being at a healthcare facility. These are such good social interactions to have. And, you have these deep relationships with your family, with your friends, with those around you. But sometimes the impact that a stranger can have, that someone you've known for a short time can have, are so powerful. And sometimes that interaction with a stranger is what you need. That's what I wrote my second book about. One interaction with a stranger completely changed my life and completely changed the way I saw myself and the way I saw the world around me. And those things are so important, and that's why I feel like social interaction is so important for us as human beings. We're such social creatures, and no matter who we are, no matter how much of an introvert we are, we still need each other. We still need people of some sort. And so I want to thank you for listening to me. I want to thank you for this time that you've given me. And I hope that I've said something to you that will affect you in some sort of way. And I hope it'll bring positiveness into your life. And just remember that whatever you're going through, whatever struggles you have, you do not have to suffer alone.